I'm Alayna Hayes. I'm Senior Director of Life Design for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here in the Life Design Lab. And we welcome you to our second conversation today on navigating working while Black, or navigating working with Black colleagues or coworkers. And Clifton, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Clifton Chambry. I'm Assistant Director for Life Design for Diversity and Inclusion. In the Life Design Lab, I specifically work with our Home and Student Affairs, Diversity and Inclusion offices. So that includes multicultural affairs, religious and spiritual life, LGBTQ life, and women and gender resources. And we are super excited to have some great alum here with us today. And we will go in alphabetical order. That will make it best by first name. And we're going to have you all unmute yourself and introduce yourselves to our wonderful community members. So Alicia, we'll start with you.
A is first, right?
Yes.
I'm just kidding. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Minter. I'm a Johns Hopkins alum. I graduated with my master's in 2011. And what else should I say about myself, Clifton? What do you guys want to know?
I would just give a little bit about kind of what you've been doing professionally and personally. Would be good context for everybody.
Okay, great. I am currently a freelance television producer. I've been a producer in marketing, mostly for television networks, but also for some digital and online media for about 15 years now. I was already working in media, actually at National Geographic Channel when I went back for my master's to Johns Hopkins. It's been great ever since. I've been continuing down this really cool path, and about almost 4 years ago, I was able to start my own company. So when I say I'm freelance, I own my own production company, consultant, freelancer, whatever you want to call me. I'm my own boss, which is fun. I also, just for the record, got my bachelor's degree in TV production at Morgan State University, which is an HBCU, just for some context.
Thank you. Darin?
Hi, oh my gosh. Hey, everyone. It's so cool that you worked in TV or in production. Alicia, that's super dope. I also saw Allison's in here somewhere. I love you, Allison. You were my favorite. But my name's Darin. I identify as a queer man, a Black queer man. I use he, him, his. You can use they, them if you want to. Who am I? What do I do? I graduated at Hopkins in 2017. I studied neuroscience, Spanish, and medicine science and the humanities. I was an RA there for 2 years, which is why I shouted out Allison. What am I doing now? So after graduating from Hopkins, I worked in a lab. The lab I worked in at Hopkins moved up to UPenn. I was a lab tech there. And then after that, I ended up moving to Spain. We're just going everywhere. But I moved to Spain where I pursued a master's in international education, and I was teaching in the public school system there. And then after that, which was last June, coming back to the States, I started a PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania, where I study communication in neuroscience. So I guess I'll stop there. That's most of the work that I do. I also have a podcast that I do too, if you want to hear more of this. But that's me.
Thank you, Darin. Jahan?
Good afternoon, everyone. For those on the East Coast, my name is Jahan Mirchandani, and I'm a proud Hopkins alum from 2015. After graduating, I finished up a year early with a degree in international studies, but I loved Hopkins so much, I refused to leave, and I wanted to stay for my 4th year. So thankfully, I got an opportunity to work with Clifton in the Department of Student Leadership and Inclusion, as the coordinator for union programming. So I was able to take advantage of some of the lessons learned and experiences I gained as part of the class president, serving in the Student Government Association, to really promote an optimal student experience for my class. After that, I moved down to DC to join Deloitte Consulting, where I've spent the past 4 years helping various universities, local governments, and federal agencies modernize their HR, finance, and IT departments. So it's been a blast, and I'm happy to speak to anyone about a little bit more about Deloitte, or kind of like life in DC or consulting, if they'd like to connect after this call too.
Great, thank you. So Clifton did put a poll out, and I'm just gonna review the results quickly. So the question was, what brings you to the conversation today? And I would say the largest percentage of responses was around learning. So thankful that folks are engaged in learning, wanting to learn more. The second highest responses were for discussion and an opportunity to connect and engage. So I think you will get all of those things here, and we're happy that you're here. And then another important question, which I think is interesting, but highlights, I think, actually a little bit of surprising space for me, a question around, have you had a conversation about race in the workplace? And actually, largely of responses, folks have said yes. So I think that that's good. I mean, that you've had those conversations. There were a few no's and some kind of. So hopefully this is a conversation that will help you to have more conversations, because I think that is the important piece here, that we're all recognizing and have known for a long time that the conversation is how we make change and how we can see advancements happen. And then lastly, would you like to have a conversation about race in the workplace? And largely most folks said yes. So, and no one said no, so that's great, which I think is important. So first, for our panelists, I think first question we like to throw out there is, just as we engaged you and Clifton reached out and we connected with you around this conversation, what were your initial thoughts around this topic, navigating working while Black, or navigating working with Black coworkers or colleagues? What were some of your initial thoughts around the conversation?
Well, I don't know if the politics of Zoom chatting. For me, I was just like, ooh, child, we'll have another conversation about talking about race and the workplace to deal with these systemic issues and oppression. I don't know if I want to take part in that. So that was my first reaction. But then also too, at the same time, I was like, all right, well, if this is going to lead to institutional change, and if this is the work that needs to be done to advance some of these things, like, let me try to show up for that. So that's how I felt. But it was a lot of like, what am I getting myself into? But also very grateful that you all are creating this space too, as well. So yeah, I'll shut up now. But yes, that was me.
I totally agree with you, Darin. I at first was like, oh, another conversation about this. It's been, my second job in the last few weeks has truly been trying to educate a lot of white executives that I work with on how to be more inclusive. I can't tell you how many networks I've worked with who have been assigned a Black Lives Matter spot and hired a white production company to create it. And I'm like, you guys, this is the problem. I am a writer. I write about a lot of things that I don't know about, but if you give me a White Lives Matter spot, I'm not gonna write it because I don't understand that world. It's not a genuine experience, and you should do the same thing. And so I've been frustrated, but also working really, really hard to educate people. And like you said, Darin, it's kind of like, why do I have to do this? But it's also like, I have a seat at the table, and a lot of people don't have a seat at the table. So I do have to do this. I have to institute change in any way that I can, and just make sure that people understand that at the very essence of everything you do, you should be thinking more about diversity in everything. Specifically making a Black Lives Matter spot. But yeah, I will too shut up now. I could go on forever.
Yeah, I was honestly honored and excited Clifton reached out to me. Similar to my experience with the student government at Hopkins, I took on a lead role with onboarding new hires at our company. And a major focus when it comes to professionally developing new employees straight out of college and into the workforce is helping them develop not just like professional skills, but also social skills. It's being able to interact with people of different religion, culture, skin color, viewpoints, and being able to kind of like promote the inclusion and the sharing of voices and opinions. So for me, it's something I'm personally very passionate about. I do it about 4 to 5 times a year for up to 100 different new hires at our company. And I would love to love getting the opportunity to share some of the things I've picked up on.
Well, I would say that kind of that's a great segue to the next question, because I would imagine that a lot of what you've picked up on, or what helps you to engage others as you're doing the trainings, or ALICIA, as you talked about, you know, having these conversations and trying to educate folks. You've had experiences at Hopkins as alum, whether it was an undergrad or a graduate student, in terms of connecting with other students or connecting with faculty. What experiences did you take from Hopkins that either helped you to navigate, you know, working while Black, or that hindered you, or that made it easier to work with Black colleagues, or things that educated you to, you know, kind of in your own space and in your own landscape? And Jahan, we'll start with you, just because you just mentioned about the training, and then maybe ALICIA, if you want to go next, and Darin.
Yep, I would say, especially like at Hopkins too, just being a part of various student clubs, whether it's like mock trial or Model UN, or being in a classroom. Personally, I feel as if we're fortunate. Hopkins is a very diverse campus. So it wasn't necessarily the case where you would end up in like a class where it was just one particular demographic of people. But when you go to the workplace, that might not be the case. And let's say every single meeting you find yourself in, or like working with the team. And like the biggest adjustment period for me while working as a minority was to understand and realize that I shouldn't be hesitant to share my thoughts and use my voice in a workplace just because I'm different from everyone else in the room, or different than everyone else attending a particular meeting. Like being invited to have that conversation in the first place, even if I'm new to the workplace and it's just to take notes, is a testament that I was invited because there are people that believe in my qualifications or my ability to contribute. So it became a matter of like having confidence in ourselves, having trust that we can speak up and we can contribute more than just like administrative tasks. And that was the case also at like Hopkins. If let's say you're attending a particular like student club meeting and you want to voice an opinion that might be different than what is currently being discussed.
Oh, that's a great point. I had a unique experience at Hopkins because I was working full-time while going to graduate school full-time. So I truly was able to use so many things that I learned, interactions that I had, networking that I was making at Johns Hopkins, literally while I was working in my field. It was a cool and unique experience. It was also really hard and exhausting, but it was great because I could literally see like research tools that I was learning in class that I could use at the office the next day. So that was really a cool thing. The other thing is, because I went to an HBCU for my undergrad, I was surrounded by, I would say 95% Black people, all kinds of different kinds of Black people, but Black people in all of my classes, all my professors. I think going to Johns Hopkins, as diverse as it is, was also a much more real world scenario than going to, for instance, Morgan State, because as much as I'd love to be surrounded by 98% Black people at work, that is not really the reality. And so I think that's one thing that was great about Hopkins too, is that the diversity there allowed me to see what it's really like more in the work field and be surrounded by other types of students asking different types of questions, offering different perspectives that I may not have gotten, for instance, at the HBCU.
Yeah, so just to add, like I have like a notebook because I find it really hard to keep track of like what people are saying in these Zoom meetings. And these conversations for me are anxiety producing. But I think like something that I really like what you said, Jahan, about using your voice. I thought that was really important as well. So I've been trying to find a bit of my confidence there too. And something that you said, Alicia, about sort of being on HBCUs, that was really interesting to me as well, because I feel like those can be what one of my, I guess, classmates calls like identity affirming spaces, where like a person can see themselves represented and see other people like them and feel that cultural support. So for me at Hopkins, I think what Hopkins gave me largely was an education, a really good education, that even allowed me to think about how we create these different spaces and how we think about institutions. And it's made me think a lot too about how sort of institutions ask particularly people of color and marginalized folk sort of about their experiences on how they're navigating, rather than turning the lens to the institution itself as well and asking what the institution can do to help that person and support them throughout the journey. And I think like you all are giving us this space to do it. So I think it's like super amazing. So I think that's a bit of an answer. I think a lot of my answer too, sometimes I'm annoying where I don't completely answer the question, but like a lot of my answer too is that I think a lot of my armor in navigating these different things came from the home, came from my parents and my family. And I think my parents are both Black, and they gave me sort of racial literacy. I think a lot of the work of Dr. Hart Stevenson talks about this, but they socialized me into what it means to be a Black person in America. My skin's brown, but I'm Black, and it informs my consciousness and the ways I have to operate in the world. But my parents gave me that armor, and the institution sort of helped me and gave me education to be able to understand and undo, I think, a lot of like things and negative internal racist ideologies that I had sort of cemented into myself. So that's my answer.
Sorry to jump in real quick. I'm Jiacheng Li. I'm the incoming freshman. Going off, Darin, what you said real quick. You mentioned the what institutions have offered students at Hopkins. Could you elaborate with a specific example?
So some really great things. So like I was taking it back. So I was on the Diversity Leadership Council as a student representative, and there's a group of amazing faculty and staff and people doing diversity work. I think like the work that like Clifton and Alana, I don't want to mess up nobody's name, but the work that y'all are doing was super helpful as well. So Student Life had a lot of that, a lot of the work that Allison was doing as director of residential life. With diversity trainings and facilitating space. These were all like amazing things that amazing people in the institution were doing to create space for these conversations and for change to happen. So those are some concrete things. There's a diversity innovation grant, which I don't know if that still goes. That was a resource that I took part in. There's a number of things. I'm gonna keep going, but yeah, basically those are a few things, a few tangible things. And classes, and Black faculty who teach these classes. So that too.
You just led me right in. That was literally, we're here.
We love a segue.
Okay, a segue. And that's what this is. And so you raised a good point. I was literally gonna ask about faculty, the role that faculty, and particularly if you've had Black faculty while being at Hopkins. And if so, okay, hand raised, good. If you've had Black faculty at Hopkins and how that contributed to your experience, whether it was, supporting you in understanding, the Black experience, whether it was learning from a Black faculty member, and if that was important to you, just curious about your perspective on the role of faculty in that.
Yeah, my two favorite classes my last year at Hopkins were taught by Black faculty member, Dr. Professor Hayes. So I believe one of the classes, I definitely remember the title, it was like Oppression and Revolt. And the other was, I believe, like Education, Politics, in Urban America. And the reason why these two classes still resonate with me, even though it's been over 5 years, is because of Professor Hayes' passion for the topics, his passion to facilitate a weekly discussion, his passion to provide personal anecdotes that complement like the weekly assigned readings, and to really facilitate like this safe space for other students, my peers, to share their personal experiences, to share their personal thoughts, knowing fully well that they will not be judged, No one will take anything that's discussed outside of the classroom. And it was an absolutely fantastic experience because it's something that you could look forward to every week and form a relationship, not just with your fellow like students and class members, but with a faculty member. And they become like a trusted advisor and mentor, which still has lasting impacts as I transition from Hopkins into professional workspace.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to go give follow up because this is so interesting. In my high school, there is it's only my high school advisor that is Black, and so I'm really curious about what you guys think that Black faculties in the university can bring to the classroom.
I think that Black faculty members give us life. Like they literally are giving us life, and they do so much labor for the students. Like they do so much. So I think that Black faculty give us like an amazing education. I think they give us a critical lens as well. I took a course with Dr. Katrina Bell McDonald, and her class inherently, like we talked about race. It was men and women in society, the course I took, but we talked about race because like we had to talk about race to talk about gender, like, and it was together. So I think Black faculty very much, I think Jahan said mentorship, do a lot of mentorship. As someone who's a PhD student and I'm running to the Black faculty all the time, so I'm like, I'm sorry y'all, because you don't get paid for this completely, but they do a lot of mentorship. And for me as well, they do a lot of sort of education that's critical, that brings in sort of the identity into the work, if it's something that they study or work that they do. So that's what Black faculty have done for me. Also too, if Dr. Katrina Bell McDonald is listening, I didn't deserve, you know, the grade on that paper, it was trash. But but thank you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Alicia, I'd love to hear your perspective too, especially I'm fellow HBCU grad here, go Rattlers, okay, strike, strike, strike again. But would love, especially because I know that your experience as an undergrad, you had predominantly Black professors. I think same for me, I think I maybe had one non-Black professor my entire undergrad, maybe two. So would love to hear your perspective too on what you think.
Exactly. I feel exactly the same way. Darin, they give us life. It's true. I can't say it any better than that. It's really all about perspective. Like just as important as it is to have professors from different countries, professors who speak different languages, LGBTQ professors, having professors or teachers who offer a different perspective, a different life experience. For you as a student, there's nothing greater than that. Being able to understand someone else's plight, walk in their shoes for a second. I mean, that's so incredible and so powerful and empowering. And I mean, I can't imagine a world where we just have all professors who are the same color. I mean, that's not acceptable. I learned about code switching from Black professors. I learned so many things, but I mean, there are things that someone, for instance, like just even getting away from race for a second, like that an LGBTQ professor can offer perspectives and understanding that I can't offer if I was a professor. And like learning those lessons and hearing those perspectives is just so incredible. And it just helps us to understand everyone in the world better, and we're gonna learn more. There's no way you can go wrong with having diverse professors.
These segues, so on point, can't even, it's like we talked about this before and we didn't, but
code switching a little bit. I was like,
that's where I'm going. I'm going there. This is the switch. And Darin is up next because I believe, Darin, that some of your research is around kind of code switching and understanding that. Can you talk a little bit about your research and help folks to understand is it mentoring, or what is the term that I'm probably butchering right now? But
No.
would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I also don't know if I'm saying your name right. Alicia.
It's Alayna.
Alayna, Alicia or Alicia? I'm so sorry.
Alicia.
Alicia, okay, I don't want to mess with nobody's name, especially in the record. So for me, code switching is what I'm not doing right now. So code switching is alternating between languages or dialects of the same or of different languages in a given conversation or setting. So this can deal with dialect. So for example, a person can be speaking African American vernacular English or Ebonics, and then they can sort of like switch to standard English quotes, because what's standard? So I think code switching is not necessarily only about language. It also can deal with affect, performativity, presentation of the self. So I'd like to think about it as how much does a person have to shape shift from their sort of default norm in order to be included in a space? Who's including who? So there's notions of power there too, but that's sort of in short what I understand code switching to be. And I study it in terms of African American vernacular English and standard English. But the ways that I bring in mentalizing, the example that I have is, say a Black person walks into a boardroom that's filled with white people. So what assumptions are they making about the white people in that space, how those white people are seeing them? You know, their mind's eye, that's mentalizing. That's the higher order mentalizing practice. And then how are they in turn altering their language in order to foster a sense of belonging in that space? And that would be the code switching part. And I study this because I think that people should not have to do this. And I think that every person, like across races too, but every person should not have to alter aspects of themselves to belong. And I think there's histories of dominating cultural norms. I call them dominating and not dominant because they aren't static, they're in flux. We're doing race right now. Do you feel that? We're doing gender. So I think that like people should not have to alternate or shift to those dominating cultural norms. So I study code switching to basically try to get people to realize that like we should be able to show up as we are with our cultural norms, with our linguistic norms, with our heritage, with our genders, with our sexual orientations, and we should be able to belong. So code switching is the alternating or the shape shifting, mentalizing, and sort of like this higher order process to try to make sense of how you're being viewed by other people. So sorry if I rambled a little bit, but that's the work that I do.
I just have an actual quick question going off of that. So for me, a lot of what I've talked to is I understand my personal identity in that I'm dealing with depression. I've gone through a lot of conversations that are not necessarily related to this, but it's given me some access to when I'm speaking to some African-American deans and different things. And I've talked to them about my feeling of not being heard by faculty. And he's talked to me about his feeling of minority students not being heard by faculty. And I've heard similar situations. And I was curious because I mentioned, and I've learned so much about the importance of seeing a positive role model of yourself. There's so much where you can talk about internalized things where once you see you have a Black faculty member, they help kids better adjust. But I was wondering with code switching, do you think in terms of normalizing it, does having Black faculty members help make it so the code switching isn't needed, where the Black faculty member, like they become part of the discussion and it's no longer, oh, we're having it over here and then school is where you have this? Because that's what I'm trying to learn, is not only the impact of what Black teachers have on Black students, but I'm also trying to learn about the impact Black teachers can have on white students like me, who all of a sudden no longer hear something and think, oh, that's not for me. I can think, oh, it is for me, it's for everyone.
I don't know if that answer or question was posed at me or not, but I want to answer it if I can. I can try to. Thank you for that question. I think that what a lot of Black faculty members bring to the table is like this idea of metapragmatic awareness. So because of like this world we live in, Du Bois, double consciousness, there's this pressure that a lot of Black people face to not only see themselves through their eyes, but also see themselves through the lens of a white supremacist world. And I think with this idea of metapragmatic awareness, which is having an awareness of the communicative norms, contextualization cues, and rhetorical strategies of other people, like you might be able to facilitate better understanding. So what I think a lot of Black faculty bring to the table is this critical awareness of the ways that the world sees and the ways that the world is communicating with Black individuals. And I think that since they bring that to the table, there might be ways that they can hold space and connect with certain Black students that might be sort of in the classroom. And I think in doing that, also connect with other students who exist in that same world. So like, I think there might be a way of knowing the world that's based in sort of like that professor's Blackness that they can sort of like use as a tool. I think like Alicia was talking about diversity just being just helpful. Like, so then being able to bring that to the table, I think will be able to help them to reach different students because of the ways that they must know the world to operate.
And if I can just say, it's all for you. I know you said like some things, but like everything that Hopkins has to offer, all the different professors, all the classes are all for you. I recently helped someone who was laid off. She's a white woman, and I helped her get an interview at BET. And she was uncomfortable at first. And she was like, well, that's not really for me. I don't know. And I was like, you need a job, right? And she was like, yes, I do. And, you know, I thought, how many times she worked at Animal Planet? I mean, is she a puppy expert? Does she know everything about reptiles? No. But that's what's on Animal Planet, right? But that doesn't mean, just because it's Black programming doesn't mean she can't work there. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want you to know that like, it's all for you. And we want you to learn just as much as we want to learn from you, if that makes any sense. Like, we all want to learn from each other.
No, that makes complete sense. And I think the idea is what I've been coming to grips with these past few, weeks and different, more so being in therapy for years has definitely helped my ability to introspection, which is, admittedly, I wouldn't be ready for this at this point without that. But a lot of it made me feel that I've been more afraid of appearing racist than I have been of being racist. And I was more afraid of making a comment and my friends going, hey, that's out of line. And me being like, no, I'm not racist. Like, that's not, more than saying it and me being like, oh, maybe that was out of line. And then I don't say it anymore. And then I don't think it. And I think that's a lot of this is, I've been so afraid of being a bad person or having the appearance of being a bad person that I wasn't willing to engage in the work that it takes to be a good person. And I think that's I totally agree with you. And I think that's a big part of this is I hope a lot of other people are seeing that like everything's for everyone. And I think the problem is that has never been not true, but we've also been keeping certain people out. And it's like everyone's for everyone. And that is why we need more diversity. And I hope that I'm not overstaying or anything, but I just think I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Thank you. I have to say too, Trent, your self-awareness is already 100 steps ahead of many others. You just thinking about the words that are coming out of your mouth before they come out, not that I want you to live in a state of fear or on eggshells, because I don't, but there's a lot of lack of self-awareness that's going on. And those people tend to be the problem, not someone who's really thinking and making sure. And also, I don't know how many Black friends you have. We don't need to name them or put up a number or anything like that. But if you feel comfortable asking them questions and you guys are truly friends, then they will answer you. And they'll give you honest answers and hopefully, make you feel better about any questions you have or anything like that. So if it's a safe space, use it.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciate about the safe spaces. That's the other thing I've been talking to my friends. I grew up in a large white area, but I just have a few close Black friends since childhood. And I was talking to them, I was like, yeah, this is why I don't hear about racism. It's not because who doesn't share Black acquaintances don't come up to me and tell me about deep systemic problems, because it's only the people I've known for so long that share it to me. And I think a lot of that has been me learning not to blame myself for where I grew up, but just recognize that I'm dealing with a biased sample size, use a statistical term. And so I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on at Hopkins, how you build the community and understanding with different people and reach people like me who may not have had this even on their radar before they came to Hopkins. And it isn't necessarily like there's no blame in it. It's just, this is a fact of life. And I'm wondering how you approach that.
I was wondering, I hate to butt in, I'm Janice, 2015 alum. I had an interesting question, great conversation, but Trent, since you're talking about since coming to Hopkins, I made the observation, obviously, when I left Hopkins, I'm now at a much more, at least the staff are very diverse, the campus is much more diverse than Hopkins. And it's funny because we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues. So earlier in the conversation, just having more Black faculty is not going to solve the problem at all. not advertising to not hire diverse faculty, because it does make a difference. But that can't be the end of the plan, you know? When I talk to my friends, I just say that right now recruitment is outpacing systemic change. They're recruiting all of us into these spaces that are still not built for us. And it makes navigating them pretty difficult. And so I'm curious, you know, I think recruitment is very important. I hope they keep doing it. I'm going into a field that there are very few Black women in, so I appreciate seeing people in those roles. But what can Hopkins do outside of just recruitment? That can't be the answer. So what can they do to make the campus life and the educational process more equitable for everyone?
I can jump in here with some thoughts based off of my personal experience at Hopkins and alluding to like the 2 classes I mentioned taught by Professor Hayes. And it's no coincidence, both of my favorite classes are from the Center of Africana Studies. And it is those like classes where, going back to your point, Jan, it's about the educational component. Yes, it helped a lot that Professor Hayes was part of Black faculty, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that just having resources where we could read about our country's history, read about the struggles that minorities have experienced, and being able to better position ourselves to be self-aware and be receptive to change our mindsets or to receive feedback and be open to understand why certain things are just wrong or unfair. Like personally, I consider myself very fortunate to grow up in Queens, New York, which I will argue to anyone is, in my eyes, the most diverse place in the world. But still, just surrounding myself with people of different religions, skin color, lifestyle, didn't necessarily mean I understood how their experiences was different from mine. That is something that without having these in-depth conversations, without learning about the history and reading and having those conversations, that it's definitely something I believe that a lot of my peers would benefit from. It's like taking a class about like African-American history, regardless of if it is taught by a Black faculty member or not.
I totally agree with what you just said. When I went to an HBCU, there were certain African diaspora classes which were mandatory regardless of your major. And I think that was huge and amazing. I mean, I work in television production, so I wasn't really going to take a bunch of Black history classes, to be honest, but I'm glad I had to because I learned a ton from it. So I think just building off of what you said, Jahan, like maybe something of that nature, maybe, and it doesn't have to be a Black history course. It could be just something that you're not, right? Like just finding some class that's about someone or a group or a religion or a race or whatever that you don't know. And that way it sort of forces you into different thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, sorry.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I apologize for the background noise. My daughter and everything, they're making sounds, but I'm Yamese Diggs. I did not graduate from Johns Hopkins. However, I worked at Hopkins now for about 20 years. I graduated from an HBCU, as many of the panelists have, and so my experience was different. Right now, I work for Whiting School of Engineering, and if you ask me, they probably have the least amount of diversity of all the schools at Johns Hopkins, and that's just because engineering is one of those fields where globally it's a male, a Caucasian or Asian male mandated field. So a lot of, you don't find too many people of African descent in there. But if you, based off the question that Janice posed, and it was great to hear you, Trent. I have a coworker I'm really close with, Ruth, and she's Caucasian and she's older, and we can talk about anything about race. And that's honestly, with ALICIA, I'll answer any of Ruth's questions because I know it comes from a place of unbiasedness. It's never to be offensive to me. Everything she's asking is to learn so that she can be better. And if I ask her something back, it's just to learn. So we never judge. And that's how you have to present it. Like when people know you're genuine at heart, they won't be offended. You know, even if it's, you know, an ignorant statement, they will not be offended. They'll just try their best to teach you, you know, to see so that you can view it from their eyes. But from Janice's point of view, we've been talking about diversity in Whiting School of Engineering for many years now. And I see a big component, like as Alicia said, I went to HBCU. We took African American history. I thought I was fully prepared being African American. That struggle was real. I thank God for that C. But because it was just so vast. I mean, to know our history in the way that they presented it, and you know, you really don't feel like you even touched a piece of the history from what was being presented to you. But as far as Johns Hopkins, when I look on the campus, it's really no one there. I don't know if it's just because of, you know, people not being exposed to engineering so much as it is, you know, anything else. However, I've always told my supervisor and people in leadership that I feel as though a big reason the diversity is not there is because Johns Hopkins and many Ivy League schools place, especially for inner city kids, they give this perception that it's unattainable. You're never going to be smart enough. Not that they aren't smart enough. You're never going to be smart enough. When I was in school, people were like, why didn't you try for Johns Hopkins? And I said, because I didn't think it was attainable. I'm leaving high school with a 4.0 and I'm like, it's not attainable, but that was the perception. And so always tell them they need to go out into the community and kind of reach out to those people so that they know this is something you can, please, you know, go ahead, you know, and let's join in and do different things. They have expressed more, but I also think that as far as Johns Hopkins is concerned, I was on another call. Sometimes we don't see the trajectory for people of color to move up even inside of the organization. And when people can't see a viewing of what is possible, they lose hope that it's possible. So, you know, people get stuck in certain positions and they go out and they achieve these masters and PhDs, and people come in and, you know, different descent coming after them, train under them, and then all of a sudden they plummet straight off. And, you know, now they're onto leadership and you're still stuck there for 20 years in the same place in hopes that somebody sees this greatness in you to propel you to that next level. And I feel like that's part of systematic racism, but if everybody's having this open conversation, it's something you need to address. People are working hard to get to a point where they feel acknowledged. They feel like they've worked hard, they've reached that level. And if no one ever acknowledges it, it kind of just makes the hope die. And I feel like Johns Hopkins needs to have a real open and honest conversation about that across all schools. What are you doing? What do you do for these graduates when they're leaving, these graduates who don't feel like, what am I supposed to do now? Like there should be some special type of office to help them with some of these issues.
Thank you, Yamese. I really appreciate you sharing that. That is, yes, it sits in my spirit heavily. I actually serve on the Diversity and Leadership Council at Hopkins, and I'm on the Staff Access and Inclusion Committee, where that is one major thing that we focus on this last 2 years of really how do we highlight the work that is happening on campus from our underrepresented staff, but then also in conjunction with Black Faculty Staff Association, specifically with Black faculty and staff, right? And so like, that is something we are heavily thinking about. And so we've continued to think about what that looks like moving forward and continue to make recommendations to the president and provost on what that looks like moving forward. Yet I think for me, I'm wondering how others navigate that experience in your workplace, right? And in your experiences that you have, like as you felt that, and if you felt something like that, I know I have. And so like, how did you move through that experience to then find spaces that were affirming, that encourage you to do what you needed to do to move on and propel yourself in your career?
I can honestly say for me, like I said, I've been with Johns Hopkins for a long time, and I still feel that I'm working hard to prove that I'm supposed to be here. after degrees, after, so this year alone, because right now I'm working on my master's degree. And just to say, along with my master's degree, being home with homeschooling children through a pandemic, doing this job, I've also been trying to work out 3 certifications just to finish in June that honestly, they're great for me to put on my resume, but they were for my performance review, to be able to say,